Um, Welcome everyone to our parenting workshop today on setting boundaries with Madeline Winter. I want to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people, and I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to anyone who's joining us who is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. So I want to thank Madeline for giving us our webinar today, our workshop today. They're always fascinating and I learned so much. She has such a compassionate approach. And I will allow Madeline to introduce herself and I'll be going off camera. Later in the session, I'll be coming back on. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will leave time at the end to answer your personal questions to do with what's come up during the webinar. So thank you again for joining us. And again, this is being recorded and you can review it after if you like. Thank you. Over to you, Madeline.
Thanks, Carolyn. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for getting here. It's always a big deal, I think, for us parents to organise all the things we have to organise, to have the space to come and attend something like this, or even just to listen to it afterwards. So welcome if you're listening afterwards. Welcome if you're listening now. I'm really pleased to be with you. Before we begin, you're on silent as everyone in a webinar is. Carolyn has introduced herself. She's my assistant. So if you need help, use the Q&A function rather than the chat, I think. And also for questions at the end, I'd be happy if we have time to answer them. And I'm available to talk with you in a little bit more detail if you want to do that, but I'll talk about that later. So I'd like to acknowledge country, pay my respect to the traditional custodians of the land, and I sit here on Wangal land. And I'd like to acknowledge that Indigenous culture survives and thrives, and that we have all gained from what they have lost. And there's much more to be said about that, but we'll do that another time. And welcome in as many other languages as I could manage, which is, unfortunately, I'm language disabled and I only speak English. But Google Translate, do let me know if I've got anything wrong there. But welcome, welcome, welcome. So I do like to start with getting our perspective right on ourselves. We are really hard on ourselves as parents. I actually think we probably got set up to be a little hard on ourselves early on in life, but once we become parents, I like to say it gets legs, because we can see our struggles playing out around and with the people we love most. We can end up feeling really bad, and parenting's very isolated. We do it in the privacy of our own home a lot of the time, and if we're not in the privacy of our own home, we're doing it out in public, where we're very likely to get criticized, or we're always a little afraid that that's what we're going to do. So I like to start here, the truth about you, which is that you are a good parent. You are a good parent. You have always done the very best that you can. If you could have done anything else, you would have. Often we don't have the tools and the information. We don't get training before we do this generally. So you've always done the very best that you can. And the challenges that you have in parenting are real and important. And you're not to blame for those. You will need to figure out how to handle them. You will need to fix up places where you may not have done as well as you would have liked, but all of that's doable. And there are big forces in the world that come down to a pointy end in our households, and we're left trying to handle them, and we end up feeling like somehow there's something wrong with us. And someday you will get a little rest, believe it or not. And here's my dear husband, who Unfortunately, my friends have got rid of this couch. But whenever we went there, it was very quick that this is what he would do. So someday you get a little rest. I have a 19-year-old. So it is, I have to say, it is a little, there's a little more room for rest. So those of you with little ones, you're in the busy phase. There's a reason why it feels pretty tight. After the webinar, we should be able to send you a link to the recording and an email with some resources in it for you. And I do encourage you, if you've got specific questions, to get in touch with me and book a free 20-minute consultation. I really like to be able to point you in the right direction for resources. And yeah, why waste your time? Spend 20 minutes with me and we can get you pointed in the right direction and help you get a bit of perspective on what's going on. Today, I want to talk about why children need limits, how they show you that that's what they need, and how to approach it with it's ultimately about a balance of connection and correction, but how to work with your child, building your relationship with what we would call a generous yes and a warm no. The warm no is something most of us were not raised with, so it's often not our point of reference. And I want to talk a little bit about the kind of support that you need in order to parent the way that you want to. So I also need, as part of sort of perspective setting, I need to talk about how I think rough enough is good enough with parenting. Some of us, you know, hope we can do it perfectly and we want to do it as well as possible, but it's a pretty challenging thing. So we all make mistakes and we often do it with the best of intentions. I like this little series of photos. So this little duck's taking her little wee babies for a walk and she encounters something she hadn't planned on. And it doesn't go all that well. But my goal here is to help you avoid and recover from what you might call your parenting fails. They're part of the picture. And what Hand in Hand offers is a set of tools for figuring out how things are today, what needs to be what needs to be addressed, what can be left, and where you need to set a limit, where you need to do some connection building. It's a constantly fluctuating thing, and you can fix things up if they haven't gone quite the way you want them to go, either because your child's in a state or because you're in a state. There are tools here that will help you all round. A little bit about me. I did a lot of different things before I became a parent. And I'd say it's better late than never. I popped her out at the last minute. And I'm very, very glad I did. I've worked with Hand in Hand for over 30 years. I have a roughly 20-year-old now, 19 and a half. But I was using these tools and this approach with other people's families for a long time beforehand. But I was inspired by the way the tools that I had seen work elsewhere. My daughter just knew what they were. She knew what this was. She knew how to do what she needed to do to recover from the places where she was feeling tense and to connect. And seeing it in that kind of detail really inspired me to want to teach it. And it very quickly became something that I wanted to share with other parents, and gradually over time got a bit more organized around that. You can learn more. You can visit my website. I highly recommend the short online courses that Hand in Hand offer. Setting limits and building cooperation will give you what you need to know to get started. And then I am really happy to spend time with people helping you figure out how it can work in your household. Because it's never a formula. This is not a formula, it's a framework. And you'll probably need some help figuring out how to tweak things so they work for you. You can get some more information resources, and I'll send these links out afterwards. And you're welcome, as I said, to make contact with me. I love to help. A little summary of the hand-in-hand parenting approach. We teach 5 listening tools. Several of them are adult to child, and they're about building connection, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, but it's the fundamental thing. Well, it's the second from fundamental thing. So we use child-directed play to build your relationship with your child. That's where you get the I call it credit in your relationship. That means that you can tackle other difficulties, which is where you're going to have to set limits. So it's a balance of connecting and correcting, setting limits to resolve the emotional tensions which are driving your child off track. So limits are, we understand limits in a very particular way in this approach. They're about helping your child get to the point where they can think better. And the way they will need to do that is through getting better connected and through resolving upsets and emotional tensions that are getting in the way of their thinking. To do that, you need good support. You need a place where you can offload, where you can build your understanding, and where you can plan for the limits that need to be set. I call this the love triangle. So the foundation is the support that you need. The second most important piece, I think, is the process of building connection and safety, emotional safety in your relationship with your child, which gives you a lot of room to move around setting limits and getting things straightened out where they're a bit crooked. And I need to address the issue of time out. Basically, time out is really good for us. It's really important that you be able to get yourself out of the situation if you're not functioning well in it. If you've lost your patience, if you can't sort of set the limit in a way that's going to build connection in your relationship, then it's important for you to get yourself out of it. This is intense work. Parenting is intense work. It's incredibly emotionally demanding. People don't, we're rarely really got much of a sense of that until we're right in it. So time out is what we need. We need a place to download. We need a place to get physical and emotional support. We need help. Time in is what our children need. So when they're in trouble, and the fact that you have to set a limit is an indication that they're in trouble, what they've lost is a sense of connection. And time in will give them that. So there's a few tools that are in the time in box. They're tools for play and connecting. They're tools for helping children to offload and process feelings which are getting in the way of them being able to think. And with those two things in tandem, what you'll get is a child who can think better, who can make workable decisions about what to do, and who'll be able to cooperate better, presuming that what you want them to do is reasonable. I mean, that's always part of what we need, is time out to check that what we're asking of our children is reasonable. And parenting is about limit setting. Limit setting is not some tricky technique that you have to get exactly right. And if you don't get it right, you've failed. And there's not you aren't a bad parent if it seems like what you're having to do is set limits. It's necessary. It's part of how it works. It's just enmeshed in the business of parenting. You don't have to do it perfectly. You'll often do it badly. I don't recommend doing it badly, but we will. Limits weren't set in ways that for most of us that were helpful. Our point of reference is often quite mean and harsh, and we are stressed. So we don't always do it well. You can fix things up if you don't get them quite right. And the process of setting limits is constant. You actually probably do it many times a day. When everything's going smoothly, you don't even notice. When it's not going so smoothly, that's when you notice that you're having to set limits. And limits are about feelings. Well, limits address feelings. The reason you have to set limits is because somebody's carrying around a bucket of feelings, your kids and your own feelings, partly to do with just the pressure that we're under as parents, but also the way that our own experience of our childhoods becomes sometimes a conscious, but often an unconscious point of reference. We've got a child in front of us who won't clean their teeth, and sometimes it's as simple as our brain goes back to say, what do we know about this? And we pull up what we have from our own experience. Often that's wrapped up with a whole lot of tension from the way we experienced it. And we end up, I'm sure as parents, all of us have ended up, yelling at our child in a way we promised ourselves we never would. It's because what we're pulling up is what got done to us or what was happening around us when we were young. And, it's not our fault. We need to resolve those tensions for ourselves so that we have more flexibility. I like to tell this little story about my young friend, Thomas, who I met his mum when her eldest and my only started school, and Thomas was about 18 months old. And at that time, in the middle of what I would say is almost a crucible of starting school, which is probably one of the more intensely stressful experiences I've ever had with my daughter starting school. And Thomas was also at that point when we were all a bit stressed. He was starting daycare, and we picked him up from daycare one day, and we got halfway down the street and he was climbing out of the car seat. And some limits are limits that are absolutely non-negotiable, and having a child properly strapped into their car seat is one of them. So Thomas is climbing out of his car seat, in a bit of a state. I pull over. My friend just has an instinct for this. I have to say I learnt this. She has an instinct. She got out of the car. She went round to his side of the car, opened the door and just got down at eye level and just said really warmly and gently to him, "Sweetheart, you're going to need to put this on." And he looked at her, his eyes met her eyes, and he burst into tears, a huge, big sadness. And she just stayed there and said, "Sweetheart, I know, but we need to buckle you up." And after about 5 minutes, his tears backed off and he put his little arms back in the harness and she buckled him up and we set off. And I can't promise that listening to an upset like that for just 5 minutes will get your child comfortably and happily into the car seat. But basically what was happening there is that Thomas knew that he needed to be in the car seat. He knew that it needed to be buckled up. But something about that experience was pulling up how much he needed. He had a lot of feelings about being away from his mum for that amount of time, being in this big new environment that was childcare, something about having to get in the car and get on our way and probably not do enough connecting in that process. And you can't always. That meant he couldn't cooperate. And with her approach, which was to connect and to listen and to set a limit. Sweetheart, we need to put the car to buckle you up. And then not pushing it, just letting him have the feelings up against that limit. Then he was able to think and do what was workable, which was to get in the car seat. We had a long saga around car seats and getting in car seats. You know, there are many different things you might need to do, but that's an example of where it's not that our children don't understand, it's that they can't comply. And they can't comply because they're carrying an upset that the limit will pull to the surface. The things that was in Thomas's way is that he'd just spent a day in this really big experience and he probably didn't feel connected enough. And in this framework, you know, when we're tackling kids who are off track, we often move straight to thinking about what's the limit that we can set. But actually, one of the preconditions for that going well is that our sense, our connection in our relationship with our child is strong enough. Connection is the thing that greases the wheels of family life. I read something, I need to find it, but apparently twins in utero, they're just little examples, you know, that I catch about what it is about connection that's so important to us. Twins in utero respond to each other with different movement patterns than they respond to their home, which is their mother's womb. They're interacting with each other and connecting with each other in a qualitatively different way than they interact with their environment. Their orientation is towards each other as the other human being in the room, assuming that mum is home at that point. And, you know, I think our not so distant experience of social distancing helps us to understand how incredibly important just ordinary incidental human connection is. Yeah, I tried to make a doctor's appointment in the middle of it, and they just started the phone telehealth thing, and the young man didn't know me, so the young doctor, and so he wouldn't do a telehealth, so I had to rock up. But after weeks of not having very much to do with anyone, I felt so much better for just going and being in the same room with this person doctor that I probably never will meet again. We just need to be with other people. We teach a listening tool called Special Time. It's a very particular way of building connection with your child. It's very deliberate. It's very efficient. It's a one-on-one playtime, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But it basically builds credit. I like to think about us having a relationship bank balance. Special Time builds credit, and basically setting limits uses credit. So if you're having to set a lot of limits all the time, and if that doesn't feel like a productive process, chances are the bank account is low and you actually need to focus on topping up your credit in your relationship bank account. So lots of struggles and lots of limit setting probably mean that the connection credits are low, and where things are going smoothly and generally your kids are able to cooperate, that's where probably the connection credits are looking good. And the challenge is to keep the balance. So if there's a lot of struggle and your child is what we would call off track, it's like they're not able to make workable decisions and they're full of feelings and they can't do stuff, then we'll need to do one of two things. We'll probably need to do both. We'll need to focus on connection. We'll need probably to set a limit at some point, and listen to how our children feel when we set the limit, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. And out of that comes cooperation and thinking and workable solutions. Patty Whiffler founded Hand in Hand Parenting, and I like this quote: when children are pushing our buttons, they can't feel us there. And more than anything else, they need to feel connected. Connection is the oxygen for their minds. That's what it is. So, one of the most efficient ways to build connection is what I would call special time, what we call special time. You could call it whatever you like, but it needs to have a name. When you have really little children, it can feel like it's all special time, which, you know, in some ways they are taking, young little children take an enormous amount of energy and time. It's hard work. But in the middle of all that, it's very helpful for you to carve out this very special time, which is one-on-one. So one adult, well, you can have more than one adult sometimes, but the logistics mean usually that really there's only one of you available, and one child. And those of you who have more than one child, there's some thinking to be done about how you can figure out how to carve out some time in your week so that you get to just pay full attention to each of your children without them having to compete with each other for your attention. That competition that children feel, and a lot of the difficulties that children have with each other in family life, a lot of that's to do with their sense of being, you know, able to connect deeply with you. So special time is where it's a one-on-one playtime, whatever you want to do. You open up this as an opportunity for your child to set the direction and to show you what they want to do, and really resisting giving any direction or judgment or commentary even on what they want to do. Your job is to be there, delighted in them. I have to say the delighted in them thing is one of the sort of hidden gems of it. I was shocked when I had a child at how little time I actually got to spend gazing into her eyes. So this is, if nothing else, this will carve that out for you. But special time is a tool that works in a million different, most marvelous ways. But fundamentally, it's about giving your child a really deep sense that you're on their side. So within special time, we do our best to try and have the child win. So, you know, if your child is keen on board games and the way they've figured out how to win board games, you know, games of chance are tricky in special time because you need to let them win, and sometimes it's just luck. But you know, your job here is to be the less competent, the less knowledgeable, and the one who makes mistakes. That this is they know who you are. They know that you're in charge. They're not confused about it, but it gives them a place to shine, and it gives them a chance to work through what it's like to be the one in charge so that they can work through what it's like to be the one who's not in charge most of the time, which is really hard on a person. I think if most of us adults had to spend our life being told what to do in the way young people are, we'd be needing someone to listen to us about how frustrated we are. So special time is also timed and announced. Because it's special, it needs to be just for 5 minutes, just for 10 minutes, just for 20 minutes. And then generally it will stop. And you need to actually be clear that this is what you're doing. Partly this is because your child needs to know exactly how long they've got you. In that way, it's a listening relationship that's not so different from if you booked a consultation with me and you weren't, you know, and I was taking phone calls, that wouldn't make you feel very safe. It's the same kind of one undivided attention that we need to offer our children. They actually don't get us very often undivided, completely undivided, so that they know exactly how long they've got us. That is the trick about special time that builds the safety that a child needs in order to show you things. So special time builds connection credits. It builds a sense that you are on their side, and that is what makes setting limits go better. They borrow from that. It provides relief to young ones from the business of being the littlest, the youngest, the least knowledgeable, the least competent. That's very wearing, and it's just a huge relief for them, for us to, they know we're pretending, but it's just a big relief for them to be in charge. It builds their confidence. Children will use special time to practice things. They'll do all sorts of interesting things in special time. It's always about something. But the main thing is that it opens up a communication highway between you and your child. And sometimes your child will do something. The young ones, it'll generally be how they set up play experiences, but they'll do something that tells you something about what's going on for them emotionally, what they're interested in, what they're worried about, what they would like your support and confidence around. And they won't always come and quietly grab your hand and tell you, you know, I feel sad today because the teacher was bossy. They'll come home, you'll do special time, and they'll set up a game where you're the student and they're the bossy teacher and they get to boss you around. They're actually working through experiences of tension there, but it's just a really, it's a big relief to them to be able to switch it over, switch it around, so they're in charge. So what is this? Special time is one component of the time in approach. What's happening is that when a child experiences emotional tension, and that can be because something just happened to them, or it can be that something just happened to them that reminds them of some earlier experience of tension. When that happens, a child feels disconnected and they will signal for help with off-track behavior. So those things that you tend to need to set a limit around, your routine will be full of experiences where they don't want to do what needs to be done. So when they can't do that, it's like they send up a signal saying, I'm in trouble, I feel disconnected, this is too hard for me. And that shows up as off-track behavior. They can't get dressed, they can't get out of the house, they won't eat the food that you've put in front of them, they're pulling the cat's tail, they're getting into fights with their sibling, any number of things that are little and big snarls in your day. We're very tempted to move in to try and fix whatever the problem is that our child is presenting. And good luck, give it a go. But often when things are really, when you're finding that sometimes you find you try to fix up one thing and then there's just another little thing that's getting snarly and that they're having difficulty with. You can safely put off trying to fix the problem, but instead bring a limit. So you're wanting to interrupt if the behavior's off track, they're looking like they're going to hit their sibling. You need to interrupt that behavior and you need to move in close enough and actually physically sometimes get in the way. But in that process, you'll need to connect with your child. So yelling at your child that they should do something, or even telling them from the other side of the room, rarely works. It's a common complaint that parents have, that they won't do what I say. I tell them to do what needs to happen, and they won't do it. Sometimes they just need us to get right up close to them, to bring the limit. We talk about bringing the limit to them and connecting in the process. And sometimes what happens then is that either the connection will be enough and they can get over the hump of whatever the difficulty is and get on with what needs to be done, or they will be upset. And that's where you get to do what we call stay listening. You don't actually need to stop that upset. sometimes you'll need to plan for it. Like if there's a really regular thing that's getting in your way, sometimes you'll need to plan for it. But generally, an upset is a useful thing, and enough of an upset clears the decks, and your child should be able to think. It may take a few times, and sometimes the project, we call them emotional projects. If there's something that your child is consistently getting stuck on, it's probably an emotional project where you really do need to be employing connection building along with limit setting in a very strategic way. It's good to come and chat with someone who understands the process as you do that. But ultimately, things should get easier. We often don't notice. We just notice that, 6 months later, we notice that we haven't, like we're so moving on to the next thing. 6 months later, we notice that, oh, there hasn't been a problem about, I don't know, getting out of bed or whatever it is. So our children, they show us in all sorts of ways that they're in trouble and that they need connection. Often really stupid little things. We've all got a list of stupid little things our children get upset about. The biscuit is broken and it's heartbroken. Your child is heartbroken, that their big feelings just don't seem to match the difficulty that's in front of them. That's a sign that they're asking you for help with feelings rather than with some practical challenge. Another thing children will do is they'll look at you and they'll do exactly the thing you just told them not to do. It's basically they're issuing a challenge. You come and stop me. And we'll need to stop them in a way that is warm and connected and firm rather than mean and harsh and distancing, but they're asking us to stop them. Sometimes children who are carrying a big emotional backpack will tend to withdraw, and that's a sign that they need some help to process some feelings so that they can get their confidence back. Sometimes carrying an emotional backpack will show up as what we might call aggression. I'm not a big fan of the word aggression. It implies a kind of intention, and I don't actually think they're they're having a feeling that causes them to do something physical and powerful. Sometimes that's damaging to others, and we need to interrupt it and deal with it. But it's a feeling that has grabbed them that causes them then to act in that way. And we need to deal with that feeling. And one of the ways we can do that is by noticing when it's going to happen and interrupting it, bringing a limit around it. Sometimes kids show us that they're off track by being unable to settle down to an activity, or they're just unable to be reasonable. It's like it doesn't matter what happens. It's not the red dress, it's the pink dress. It's not the pink dress, it's the black dress. The pants don't feel comfortable, whatever it is. And often if a child's brewing a big upset, they'll not be able to meet your eyes. You need to understand that if you find a way of meeting them, there's something about eye-to-eye contact that's deeply connected, that what will happen is often, if you can figure out how to do that, they'll have an upset. So we talk about, special time is the big yes. It builds connection credits from which they borrow when you bring a limit, which is a warm no. So like my friend with Thomas, it needs to be close and connected. You need to stop the irrational behavior. So you need to stop the car, go around and deal with the fact that your child's climbing out of the car seat. You need to connect, make eye contact, generally gentle touch, and you just need to hold the limit. Sweetheart, you need to get into the car seat. We need to buckle you up. Generally, holding the limit, it's better if you only use 5 words or less. I need to write an article about that. You're not teaching your child something. You're holding a limit against which they can push, and up comes some feelings. And those feelings are what you're after. That's what's getting in the way. So you need to expect feelings. Tears contain stress hormones and release grief. Tantrums release frustration. Laughter, which is much underrated, heals fears. And often being little is actually quite scary, and children need to do a lot of laughing around that. That's how we release lighter fears. And enough of that process relaxedly, sort of with you relaxedly hanging in there with them, that is what will restore thinking and cooperation. We call this aspect of time in, we call it stay listening. It's where we look to drain the feelings which are driving off track behavior. So you want to move close and be warm. You need to bring the limit. So you need to physically bring the limit, not expect that they'll be able to take on a limit that you just state, because they can't hear you. They can't think. They're not rational when they're in that place. They're in a place of feelings, and you need basically to bring the limit, stop the off track behavior as gently as possible. In particular, it's your job to make things safe. When a child's in that spot where you're at the point where you have to set a limit, they're not able to take care of things. They're in feelings, and it's your job to keep things safe. So if a big upset happens and someone gets hurt or something gets broken, it's important not to get mean and nasty and blaming around that. It's actually your job to get the vase out of the way. It's your job to hold them close enough that they can't hurt anybody if that's what's needed. So you're the safety manager. And feelings are part of the process. So you need to expect them. They're not a sign that your child is they are refusing, but they're not a bad sign. They're a good sign. They're the feeling offloading as a result of the limit that you've set. Sometimes what a child will say or do when they're in that place of upset is can be quite hard to listen to. And it's really important that you not take that personally. When they're in that place, they're just thrashing around, and they'll thrash around as effectively as they can. And sometimes they'll target you. I like to say it's a big project with our children. It's like we are a target and they have a very sharp arrow. And the project is both about reducing our target and blunting their arrow. So it's a two-pronged process, basically. And as I said, it's useful to just stick to 5 words or less. If you're saying more than 5 words when you're setting a limit, what you're actually trying to do is get them to be reasonable. And they've already shown you that they can't. So you don't need to fix up the problem. You don't need to argue with them about it. You just need to bring the limit. I can't let you do that is probably enough a lot of the time. And, if you can bring yourself to just hang in there with the upset, not try and stop it, then what you're allowing your child to do is offload their emotional backpack and get to a point where they can think better about what needs to happen. And it's good after all of that, keep track of how your child is afterwards over time, if not immediately. I think you'll find that things get easier. So it's a balancing act between a warm no and a big yes, and the two things work together. The other thing that's important is to understand that children use pretexts to show you that they're in trouble. So the broken biscuit is a pretext. That the lost softie is a pretext. I don't know, there can be any number of pretexts. And it's better for you. Often if a child's carrying a heavy backpack, they'll show you quite early in the piece. And you might be inclined to try and fix whatever problem they first present with, and then second present with, and third present with. But by the time you've gone too far down that track, the risk is that you're beginning to lose your patience. And it's actually a fine thing to decide that at the first, especially if you're doing plenty of special time, so they really have a sense that you're on their side, it's actually a fine thing to choose the first little difficulty and just bring a warm, gentle limit at that point. So you don't want to wait till you're at the end of your rope. The feelings that they're trying to work on are basically the same. They were the same at the beginning of the process as they are an hour later. And in general, big feelings tend to come in small packages. So those little glitches in the day, that they won't clean their teeth, for instance, or that those are signs that they have big feelings. Could be about something that happened when they were very little around their mouth, which is not uncommon in terms of some of our strange birthing practices. But it could be about, any number of other things. So it's useful to have an approach which is looking out for those glitches and trying to figure out how to bring a limit early. And this piece, if we were in person, I would get you to try this. This is a tremendously powerful tool for giving you a chance to take some time out. Some of us have friendships where we can talk about some of the stuff that comes up, but one of the challenges is that we need to be sure that what we're telling someone isn't going to get used against us, and that we aren't going to get interrupted. It's very much like what special time does for young ones. We need to know how long someone's prepared to listen to us so that we know how to craft our story and how deeply to go. So a listening partnership is different from a conversation. It's a chance for us to give each other support as parents in the complex and difficult work that parenting is. So generally, you would I've got a little download, which I'll send you some links for. I recommend that you actually, if you find someone that you think you'd like to do a listening partnership with, I recommend that you actually get the cheat sheet and read it out so that you're both really clear about what the guidelines are around listening partnerships. You can add listening partnerships to your friendships. But actually, there's a great luxury in figuring out someone to do a listening partnership with who you are not involved with in your life, because it means that you're free to really say anything you need to say. And it's not ever going to be something that someone has to kind of keep in mind, or it won't ever influence how they are towards you and the people in your life. But you can set up a listening partnership with anyone who you think might make a good listener. So basically, the framework for listening partnerships is that you find someone, you take equal turns. Some people are big talkers and other people are more reluctant. But it turns out that we all need to tell our stories, and that safety builds as we hear each other's stories and as we come to understand that everyone has a story. So we can help each other. It's like pulling each other up by our bootstraps. And when it's your turn to listen, you want to listen with warmth and offer your full attention, and don't interrupt and don't give advice. What you'll often be pulled to do, like if you listen to what happens in conversation, someone will start and then someone who's listening to them will be reminded of some story of their own, and often what will happen is they'll interrupt the first person's story and start to tell their own story. Yeah. So you need to, for a listening partnership to really work, you need to resist that temptation to interrupt or give advice. That you're just there to listen, and with enough listening time, a parent can generally figure out what the next step is and what they need to do given their circumstances and yeah, where they're at. We don't get much of a chance to do that as parents. There's a lot of advice out there about what we should do. And advice is a really tricky thing. Sometimes when we ask for it from someone where we are confident they'll have a way of looking at things that will be helpful, that's one thing. But often a lot of advice is unsolicited, and most of the time it's actually about someone else's feelings, not really about your situation and what's going to be useful for you. So listen with warmth, give your full attention, don't interrupt or give advice, and keep it confidential. This is what makes it safe. So if you're in a listening partnership and you're reminded of your own story by what you've just listened to, sometimes it's useful to have more than one listening partnership so you can go off to someone else and talk about how that made you feel. But also, we're parents and we're going to find each other's stories remind us of things we could talk about. And that's just fine in a listening partnership. You just need to tell your own story, not tell it by way of someone else's. So if somebody has just talked about how difficult dinner time is in their household and you're reminded of your own dinner time problem, just talk about your dinner time problem. Don't go into your story by way of just like you, or I don't agree with you, or whatever. You don't need to refer to the other person's story in order for you to be able to tell your own story. The other thing that listening partnerships are really helpful for are one of the main difficulties that we have in our parenting is that it reminds us of our own childhoods, often in ways, sometimes, as I said, we can tell, and at other times we aren't aware. It's a feeling that's functioning at a sort of subconscious level. But it's very useful to tell the story of our own experiences as children. So you could, and particularly when sometimes we're tempted to start a listening partnership with someone who we are really close to, and come and chat with me before you do that, because if it's your parenting partner, there's going to just be a whole bunch of areas where you have a really complicated relationship, and being able to listen to each other without interrupting or taking it personally or referring to it may actually be quite challenging. But one of the things you can do with someone that you're really close to is listen to the story of their early life. Or, I mean, one of the questions I encourage people to ask is, what was it like for you when you were whatever age your child is now? And you're not going to stop having something to say there because your child's constantly changing. And how you respond will have a lot to do with what was going on when you were 10 or you were 8, or how you deal with, for instance, I started off with the start of school, has a lot to do with what the start of school was like for you. For me, it was quite dramatic, partly because the buildings, that some of the older schools, those buildings are really old and they look exactly the same as they did when I went to school. So it was this kind of quite extraordinary sense of all of those things that happened to me when I started school flooding me. So I really needed to have some listening partnerships where I could talk about what it was like when my daughter started school, partly we need space to sort out the difference between our experiences and our children's. We often get a bit confused. We worry that our children are having a hard time, and actually it was that we had a hard time and their struggle is reminding us of the hard time that we had. So you can talk about how limits were set in your own childhood. You can talk very usefully about anything you can remember to do with being the age that your child is now. And you can kind of explore, where are the places where you get triggered. As you use this process more, you find that you get less reactive. You have more of a sense of a choice for how you're going to respond to something before you react. Mostly when we're carrying big feelings around, we react we react in ways that are out of our own emotional story rather than based on what actually makes sense now. And what we want to get to is to be able to look at the situation in front of us and say, okay, what is the real problem here? Or sometimes even, is there a problem here? Sometimes it's difficult for us to tell. So romping through this, this question will come up, and so I need to talk about it. It's about where is the place for rewards and consequences. And the problem is that by and large, there's no place for them. Part of it is because the framework a framework of rewards and consequences assumes that what you're able to reach in your child is a rational state of mind. It's a state of mind that can assess whether or not the reward is worth it, can get organized in terms of their behavior around achieving the reward, or avoiding the consequence. So the mistake we make around rewards and consequences is that we're trying to appeal to reason when our child has already indicated to us that they are off track and that they're in their feeling mind. So, you can have come to some even mutual agreement about what reward will be produced or achieved if a child behaves in a certain way. But once they're in their upset or in their feelings, often they don't give a shit about the reward. They're not motivated by it. They don't care in that moment, and they can't remember it or reach for it. So it's generally not an effective, it's based on a wrong understanding of the difficulty, and it's not an effective way of dealing with regular snarls in your relationship with your child. It's also, the research is fairly clear that when we offer external rewards that are a person's intrinsic motivation, their internal motivation to comply drops off. So they might have started off being fairly motivated to do what needs to happen. But if you start trying to supercharge that with some kind of reward or consequence, it seems to eat away at what might have been there originally in terms of getting them in the direction of what needs to happen. The research also suggests that often, in fact, young ones do worse. People do worse when they're trying to achieve a reward than they would have otherwise. And the other thing is that it turns you into the police person. It turns you into someone who has to monitor the achievement of whatever goals it is that you've set. I mean, goal setting outside of trying to deal with a off-track behavior is a different process, but you end up in this position where you have to kind of be following through on stuff all the time, and it sets the wrong tone for your relationship with your child. A lot of the difficulty in your relationship with your child is that you are in charge of everything all the time, and that eats away at connection. And doing more of it around your limit setting doesn't help. Setting and holding a limit and then listening to the feelings that come up do. And in fact, the thing that may be difficult about getting something done in the household, chores are a perfect example. The thing that may be difficult is that children are just not wired to do things without enough sense of connection, and that the way to get chores done in the household may be that you need to figure out how you can do it with them, or front ending it with special time so there's plenty of connection credit, and then everybody can go and do whatever job it is they've said they want to do. And then if there's some chore that needs doing, which is effectively a limit, if it's a reasonable expectation and they're not able to do it, then that's a sign that you either, that may be a sign that you need to bring a limit around it and hold out an expectation that it can be done, and be happy to listen to their upset about it. Homework's another one. I do a whole sort of talk on just homework, but homework often lands for young ones in a place where they feel very depleted and without enough resource, and it brings up a whole bunch of feelings. Homework is really better understood in the home context as a limit setting exercise that will bring an adult's connection to them around learning, and provide an opportunity for them to have some upsets if that's what they need to do. And so that's, I like that saying. The consequence needs to be connection. So if things are going off track, a child needs a sense of connection with you, whatever that looks like in your family. And, I'm really happy to spend some time with you figuring out, what does that look like in your family? What works for you? What works for your child? That's the pathway to cooperation. So you can learn more again. You can come visit, see what I've got to say. I do recommend Hand in Hand's online courses. They're about 3 hours of video. They're divided into 3 broad classes. The videos of each class are broken up into small chunk-sized pieces, and it really will help you understand how to orient yourself around a framework that's about connection building and limit setting as 2 pieces of the same. It's 2 pieces of the same balancing act that you have to manage. I'll send you out a link with some information about resources, and I'm really happy to spend a bit of time with you. So please, if you haven't already, do book a short parenting consultation, and we can get stuck into what it is that's going on in your household. So I'm not sure if Carolyn's back, but I will just take a look here at this question. Okay, this is a good question.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I was just looking for the tab.
Okay.
Hold on one second. I'm happy to read out the questions. And
okay.
Please feel free. We've got another at least 20 minutes. Someone has asked, if you had a triggering childhood and the emotional support was not properly there, how do you maintain the connection with your children whilst not triggering your children potentially? Wow, what a great question. Thank you for that.
I think if you know you had a tough childhood, I think there needs to be a place where you can get to talk about that and about how it shows up now, that's away from your child and that's with another adult. I think that's important. one of the things I love about working with parents is that um, it's deeply emotional work. Some of us, before we were parents, we were able to avoid those difficult spots. Once we become parents, because we're deeply committed to this relationship, it's often not, we can't just go and get another job. We have to kind of keep fronting up. So we're pushed up against places where we don't function all that well, and it's not that easy to figure out another way. And that's out of your love for your family and the people that you're close to. That's actually a really great spot from which to do the emotional work that needs to be done anyway. So I think we need a place, and a listening partnership can be that, a counseling relationship can be that. A fair bit of what I end up doing, basically, we might start around where you um, think there's a problem with your child. And often it ends up that we need to spend some time around where you're getting triggered and why you're getting triggered. So I think that's important. Um, I think it's important to understand that if you're carrying that kind of baggage, it's probably your children already know. And they know where your sort of difficult spots are. If you can get to a point at the very least where you can tell when you've got to that point where you're really triggered, and you can just get yourself out of the situation, even if it means shutting yourself in the bathroom while your child's screaming at you on the other side of the door, to keep, if you're not, if you know there's places where you're going to lose it, if you can just get this emotional space, and it takes sometimes some work to get there, where you can basically back off. One of the problems is that when we're triggered, we tend not to understand we need to back off. We tend to back on and often, yeah, get meaner. So it's a tricky spot. What I would say is that we all bump into those spots, and I don't think there's a parent on the planet who hasn't done stuff we wish we hadn't done. It's almost part of the condition of parenting, along with worrying. Give me someone who's worrying, and they're probably a parent. Give me someone who's feeling bad about themselves, they might well be a parent. So I think we have to be careful about how much we bash ourselves up when we've made mistakes. And that's where the tool of special time comes into its own in a very profound way. If we've just yelled at our kids, I know people say, "Oh, it doesn't justify the yelling." We need to do the work so that we aren't yelling at our kids. But if we have got into a place where we've behaved in a way that isn't going to be helpful, then it's really useful to basically resort to reconnecting with our child. Our children just want to be connected with us. They're actually not that interested in our struggles, except where they're doing damage to them. But they just wish we'd get off that track and come and play. Largely. And generally, they're very generous with us and very forgiving. So a regular routine of special time is a chance to, if you've gotten into trouble with your child over any particular issue, just doing special time just takes the pressure off, reconnects, resets the relationship. A regular practice of special time gives your child space to tell you what's really going on. Sometimes they will use that time to tell you what they think of you, either directly or indirectly. But that turns out to be a very repairing and useful thing in your relationship with your child. So I think parenting is just so not a perfect art. And what I love about these tools is that we recognize that. We we, you know, we encourage parents to find a place where you can talk through stuff for yourself and begin to understand what your triggers are and resolve them. But it's also just about keeping your focus not on the mistakes you've made, not on the limits you are having to set, but on where can you build connection so that there's plenty of connection credit in the relationship, which is just what keeps things on the right side in a relationship where it's, you know, it's a tricky relationship. We're big, they're little, we're in charge of everything, they're not. It's just a very useful thing to give your children space to show you what's going on for them and getting out of their way. And it turns out that that counteracts the places where we might make mistakes, if that makes sense.
That was really excellent, Madeline. Thank you. And I appreciate the bravery in asking that question and
Yeah,
really can relate.
yeah.
So I don't have any other questions on the
Anyone else got a
question and
question? I
answer.
had a
Is there
few.
any other way you want to use the rest of our time?
Let
It
me have a
sounds
look. I had a couple of questions. I had a couple of questions beforehand.
oh,
Okay, how about this one? How to manage refusal to do daily routine tasks, teeth cleaning, etc. How to manage and how to manage parental preference, always wanting mum. Two of my favorite topics. So let's have a little chat about those. They're two quite different topics. So children get really sick of being told what to do all the time. And it's inevitable that you are going to have to direct things a lot of the time. That's part of the deal. That's what parenting is. We need to give our children space, a break from that. And we need to understand that the fact that they, you know, it becomes really extra clear when kids go to school. It's like when kids first go to school, the way I like to talk about it is the school takes up all the limit setting air, all the oxygen for limit setting that there is. And so you'll find things may get difficult at home because actually you need to be balancing out for a period extra connection to balance against, because school is just a lot of about having to do things when you're told to do it. So I don't know, I'm a bit all over the place, but daily routine tasks can become a pretext where a child gets stuck on feelings of having to do stuff. So you know, their life is full of things they've had to do that they didn't necessarily want to do either at that time or at all. And when you want them to brush their teeth, or you want them to come to the dinner table, or you want them to get ready for bed, or whatever the routine is, which is getting difficult, what's happened is that that has become a pretext for all of the other baggage they're carrying around. And so you need to figure out how to build connection around it and then set a limit around it. So teeth cleaning is a good example. One of the first things I'd recommend is one, just do 5 minutes of special time before the thing that generally is causing difficulty. Sometimes that will allow you, sometimes that will get enough connection in the relationship that your child can get over those feelings that, or get through, pass over. They don't get dealt with, but they can pass over those feelings and get their teeth cleaned. So special time, as I said, I think it's a miracle tool. But one of the ways, a lot of those little daily routine things are kind of power struggles. And one way to deal with a power struggle is to let go of the rope. If you're in a tug of war, you know, one way to win the tug of war is let go of the rope. And special time is a kind of way of letting go of the rope. So you, instead of having an argument or persisting with the thing that needs to be done, you just completely back off. Let's do 5 minutes special time. I'll do whatever you want. What do you want to do? And just do that completely give yourselves over to that for 5 minutes. And sometimes the thing that needs to be done suddenly becomes doable for your child. It also gives them, it just plumps up their sense that you're on their side, so that if at the end of 5 minutes they still can't do the thing that needs to be done, there's more room for you to set a limit. When we set a limit, I think it's important that we not assume that we're going to actually achieve the thing we're setting the limit around straight away. So you may not get the teeth cleaned tonight, but if you then hold out, sweetheart, we need to clean our teeth. I know. And there's a big upset. That upset's going to be, I mean, teeth cleaning's not that bad. It has to be about something else. So you can be confident that when you've set things up in that way and you're setting a limit and you're listening to the upset and you're not getting preoccupied with the outcome, that they're offloading some important feelings. And yeah, so that's sort of special time working both to warm things up and to just short circuit the power struggle, then with some limit setting and listening and not being too preoccupied with getting to the point of cleaning the teeth. The reality is around a lot of that stuff, if it doesn't happen tonight, it's probably not the end of the earth. The other tool that I haven't talked about here, and I must work up a webinar on playful limit setting, but playfulness is, we do not appreciate just how incredibly powerful it is. So one of the things you can do around something like toothbrushing is, and I had a friend who there was a period where their child went through where they didn't want their nappy changed. And it happened that my friend had her friend's dad had cancer, and they had these big pull-ups. And so she got a bunch of these pull-ups, and they just did a whole lot of playing around with the pull-ups. She'd get her daughter to, pull the pull-ups on her. She'd have trouble getting the pull-ups on. She'd put the pull-ups on her head. She'd put the pull-ups on the daughter's head. They'd do games around, initiated by the child, around doing nappy changes on teddies and whatever. Where we can get a light tone, and in particular where we can touch on a difficulty, but do it in a way that has us be less competent, has us be kind of cheerfully stupid, leaves plenty of room for our child to be in charge, where they get to just laugh about the thing that has to be done. That's often incredibly useful. It's an incredibly useful way of resolving lighter tensions around things. It also works sort of cheerful playfulness around a particular topic where we're not making fun of our children. Actually, the goal more often needs to be that we're making fun of ourselves. Children just love it when we make fun of ourselves. And the reason they love it when we make fun of ourselves is because we're so darn serious most of the time. And serious people are a little bit scary a lot of the time. So if we change our tune and are light-hearted, that often just eases the way they get to laugh a bit about how we're often a bit tense in our response to things, and it just interestingly resolves things. So this is called play listening. So you could play listen around teeth cleaning. You could get them to clean your teeth. You could really ham up tooth cleaning and try and get them to show you how to do it, and then do it badly and start cleaning your underarms or cleaning your glasses with the toothbrush or whatever. It doesn't have to be very sophisticated a lot of the time before children can find a way to laugh about something that has been a real point of tension. So I think that that's generally a good first line of defense around issues in your routine, tasks in your routine that have got difficulty. I mean, the thing about those things is that you have it's probably been a problem for a while, and you have probably got a bit tense. And so you almost need to tackle that piece in your relationship with your child before you can, like, you need to kind of deal with the fact that you're a bit tense. They'll laugh about that, and then they might be able to play around. You might be able to together play around with the actual topic at hand, and often that makes things easier. So that's that question. And then the second part of that question that that person was asking was how to manage parental preference, always wanting mum. This is a topic, we could have a whole webinar on this, but a lot of that is about, it's often wanting mum and not wanting dad. It's hard for the person who's not being wanted. And what I like to say to them is it's actually code for I really miss you. So part of always wanting mum is it's just it's a separation issue. It's a big chunk of feelings around separation and connection. And a first, there's a couple of sort of strategies I can give you in terms of these tools that would tackle that. But a first one is to plump up the relationship between the parent. It's generally the parent the child wants is the sort of primary caregiver. And if that's gotten sort of stuck with a whole lot of neediness, one of the first things you need to do is plump up your child's relationship with the other adults in their life, in particular the other, parent, if there's two of you. So doing special time with each of you and making sure that you give priority to the connection building in the non-primary parent, that's going to be really important. And then there'll be a limit setting exercise around, so you've built a sense of connection and credit in the relationship bank balance between the non-primary parent and the child. And then there's some limit setting, which you can approach playfully at first. So a lovely game to play when a child is only wanting one parent is for the parent they don't want to ham it up and kind of beg and get desperate, play up being desperate around wanting the child. And then children love sort of the love tug of war. So you basically, you can kind of fight over who gets to have the child. That will give a chance, give a child a chance to just do a lot of laughing around being wanted. And so the first bit is to tackle getting it really clear that both parents want the child. Of course, you both want to be close to your child, but your child can't always tell that. And that's one of the really wonderful things about special time, is that it actually draws everyone's attention to the fact that you are completely theirs. You could have been sort of 3/4 theirs all day, but for some reason they couldn't notice, or they couldn't fully feel it because they couldn't really count on you. So getting very deliberate about special time and then playing around with games around wanting your child and competing with each other to have them will often address some of that. And then at some point, there's going to be a limit setting exercise there around, sweetheart. And again, you don't want to get too focused on actually getting them to say the thing you're holding out, the limit you're holding out is you can be with dad. But you don't actually need to get to that. You just need to present that as a limit and listen to a child's upset about it. It'll sound like sometimes the upset will sound like they don't want the other parent. That's not true. It's really important to understand that as code for, I just don't feel quite close enough to you. Or I have some big feelings about being away from my mum that I need to work through so I can confidently be with whoever it is who's offering me their attention. It's a complicated question. I hope those tips are useful. If that's what you're in the middle of, I really recommend coming and having a bit of a chat with me, because it's a project that's good to work through with both of the adults involved and understanding how you can work together around that. I think that probably takes us up pretty close up to time, Carolyn.
Yes, we've only got 2 minutes left.
Perfect.
Just want to thank you for such a compassionate presentation for the parents and carers who joined us today and will join us hopefully to watch the YouTube. It's always just wonderful to get such reassurance from you, Madeline. And I realized I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of the video. I always get a bit caught up with the technical aspects.
I know.
Yeah. So I'm Carolyn Lancaster. I'm the Children, Family and Youth Officer at Randwick City Council. We do have a parenting calendar, which may be the way you found out about this, that comes out in January and in July. We'll be printing them through December, and there'll be workshops from Madeline coming up in the next 6 months. But all of the workshops there are free, and there are some via webinar that are like Parent First Aid that are free, and workshops for dads. So I really encourage you to check out the parenting calendar. We also post it on our website, and as soon as we have the new one out, we put it on as a PDF on the Children and Families page, or you could just do the search feature on the website. So this video will be sent out to you. It'll also be posted on the Randwick Council YouTube channel. And I just want to thank again, Madeline, for such a beautiful presentation and a compassionate presentation about parenting, and so much understanding there, and the offer of the resources and all the other offers you make. So thank you again. And is there anything else you want to say, Madeline, before we close?
No, my pleasure. And don't go it alone. Do get in touch if there's something you could use a hand with.
Exactly. Support is critical, and reducing that stigma of getting support is critical. So thank you for that reminder. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful day.
Okay.
And thanks for joining.
See you. Bye.